Welcome back. In today's video, we'll be looking at how to use the different navigation systems in the IndiaFoxtEcho Tornado. During our first flight today, we'll look at using the VOR system, TACAN and ILS. In our second flight, we'll be using the Waypoint Navigation system. We'll start today by looking at VOR Navigation. Now, those of you who've looked around the cockpit will have realised there isn't the traditional nav radio frequency entry capability in the Tornado. But what you will see is the TACAN frequency selector, where you can change the digits, and also the X and Y value. Luckily, we can convert either VOR frequencies or ILS frequencies into the TACAN navigation digits. We can either try and remember the sequence ourselves, or far more easily, just look it up in a chart such as the one on the screen, and I'll leave a link for you to that document in the video description. You'll be able to find the VOR or ILS frequencies that you need through either the in-game map or through an external flight planner such as Little Nav Map. Once you have them, you can look them up in the table and make a note of the TACAN frequencies you'll need later on. Enter your frequencies by either manually using the dial in the cockpit, or you can click and use the in-game menu, which is a way I quite like to do it. For today's flight, we'll depart from RAF Norfolk, heading first to Bravo Papa Kilo, the Brookmans Park VOR, before continuing on to Bravo Kilo Yankee, the Barkway VOR. From there, we'll switch to TACAN, head over Lake and Heath, and then dial in the Marham TACAN, and hopefully then switch to ILS and make a fairly reasonable ILS approach into the runway at Marham. Our first VOR is 117.50, which when you look at the table you'll see corresponds to TACAN 122X. We'll use the menu to set our frequency, adjusting up or down as appropriate, and not forgetting to check each time is it X or Y TACAN frequency, and using option 6 to make that adjustment if necessary. You'll also see the initials BPK appear, which is very helpful in letting us know we have indeed selected the correct frequency. Now that we've selected the correct frequency, we can switch our HSI control over to App 1, Approach 1, and you'll see it's picking up the signal and the distance to the navigation aid. And we're going to dial in a course of 045 so that we approach on a particular course into that aid. Before we take off, if you're finding this helpful, please do feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. We're now airborne. We've initially followed the runway heading out of Norfolk, so we will need to start adjusting back towards the left to pick up the course line on the HSI. We're not going to fly too fast or too high today, so I'll switch on the autothrottle, just so we can concentrate on looking at the navigation instruments a little bit more. As we get close to intercepting the correct course heading, you'll see the yellow bar start to drift back towards the centre, and we want to try and time our turn so it ends up in the middle of the HSI, heading in the direction we want to go. Sometimes you might over or undershoot and just need to make a second adjustment to your course. So to summarise, using VOR Navigation in the Tornado, look up your frequency on the chart, find the correct corresponding TACAN frequency, dial it in either on the cockpit control or through the in-game menu, and you can then set a course if you want to, so that you approach on a particular path. And you'll see we are now on our desired course, heading into the BPK VOR. Looking ahead to our next VOR, BKY, we'll see that's 116.25 on the VOR, and looking at the chart, 109Y on the TACAN. Like the first time, we'll program that in using the in-game menu, and of course just remembering we need to switch over from X to Y on this occasion, and like before you'll see the initials BKY appear in the center of the menu, which is a helpful hint that you have got the right frequency. One thing to be aware of when changing between VOR frequencies is that, as you'll see, we're still pointing at the old frequency on the dial, so we just need to flick off app1 mode and back onto it to change that over on the HSI. I'm not sure whether that's intentional or just a little bug that needs ironing out, but just useful to know at the moment. While we're flying towards BKY, we'll think ahead to our next navigation frequency for when we want to head on to Lakenheath. Now Lakenheath has a TACAN itself, so we don't need to do any conversion here. A really nice and helpful feature of this Tornado is that it does have presets for common TACAN airbases. So if you go to option 7, you see it's got UK, Germany and Italy, the big Tornado using countries, and clicking through to the UK you've got collections by alphabetical order of different airbases. So in this instance we can find Lakenheath quite easily and see that our required TACAN frequency will be 39X. So we've set Lakenheath as our TACAN frequency, but you'll see as before it's still pointing, the HSI is still pointing at the old frequency, so we'll switch the HSI selector onto TACAN, and there we go, we're now pointing at Lakenheath. We've got a distance as well. On TACAN mode you can't set a course, and you want to be orientating your aircraft to point to that white arrow at the top of the yellow line. If you do want to follow a course on TACAN, I believe you can switch back to the app1 approach mode and regain that course setting functionality. We'll rejoin our flight as we're approaching Lakenheath. So our distance measure tells us we should be just about approaching Lakenheath. And great, we are, so our navigation has worked. So we're now going to change over to the Marham TACAN frequency, and again we can use the helpful in-game presets, ground control, UK,
Roger,
and over to Marham. You'll see Marham is to the northwest of us, so we just need to bring our heading round a little bit. And as I mentioned before, if you're on this TACAN mode, TAC on your HSI selector, you can't dial in a course, but if you want to, you can switch back to the app1 mode, and as you can see you can then set your course deviation if that's desired, but I'm just going to use the TAC mode for our trip up to Marham. Thinking ahead to our ILS approach to Marham, we'll need to find the ILS frequency, which is 110.75, which on the TACAN is 44Y. Also worth noting, the Marham runway heading for the ILS approach is 235, and we're approaching Marham from pretty much due south. So I'm going to choose to fly over to the northeast to bring us round to the correct side for a runway heading. So we'll select 44Y on our ILS to get us set up, ready to make that approach. Just the same as before, we can go through the in-game menu or the front right cockpit selector. And remembering for this, it's a Y frequency. Again, we get some initials to help us know we've got a correct frequency in there. And we'll switch our HSI back onto the Approach 1 mode. And we know that our runway course is going to be 235 degrees, so we'll dial that in now. Using the yellow bar in the HSI for an ILS is very similar to navigating a course to the VOR, and we want to ultimately get the yellow bar back into the center. But then you see we also have these white bars. The inner white bar represents our plane, the outer one, which is currently above that, represents the glide slope into the runway. As you'd expect, where we're this many miles away, 12.7, and around about 3,000 feet, we're currently below the glide slope, which is good. We want to intercept the glide slope from below, let it come to us, and then descend, rather than trying to make a steep diving approach to pick up the glide slope. But as you see, when we get closer to the runway, the outer bar, which is currently above, will start coming back down. So we're making our turn onto the Marham runway heading, and we'll be keeping an eye on the HSI. Just one thing to note, unlike some more modern fighter planes, we won't get HUD symbology showing us either our course or our glide path, so we will just be glancing at the HSI as we go into our descent. So we've made our turn, and we've got ourselves lined up with that yellow bar heading correctly into the runway. So we're now just watching the white bar to the left of the HSI slowly coming down as we intercept the glide path. Once it comes level with the inner bar, which represents our plane, we want to try and keep those two matched as we descend down to Marham. It's not always easy to do, I'm not particularly good at it. The more you fly a particular plane, the better you'll get more of a feel for the rate of change of speed, how quickly or slowly the engines spool up and down. So it's certainly something which you do get better at with practice, and when you do get quite a nice approach, it is quite a satisfying thing to do. So they're now level. I've reduced throttles, and we're going to just try and match those bars on the way down. Of course, the ILS isn't the same as a full auto land system you might find on a commercial airliner, but particularly in bad weather or nighttime conditions, it's very helpful for getting you to that very last bit of the approach, where you can then start to see visually the runway lights. And we have touchdown. So to recap, we've looked at VOR Navigation, TACAN, and we've made an ILS approach into Marham. In the next flight, we'll look at using the Waypoint Navigation system, how it works in both manual and automatic modes, and we'll attempt a nice flight around some alpine passes. In this second flight, we're going for a trip around the Alps, using the Waypoint Navigation system. And that's a really nice simple system where you plan your flight in advance and then you get the cues on both the HUD and the HSI to take you around the route. Now by default that's in automatic mode, which is probably how you're going to want to use it, where your backseater, your WSO, is going to switch between the waypoints for you as you approach them. But you can also do this manually if you want to from the back seat. So we'll jump in the back and have a look how to do that. So we're in the back seat now, and you'll see on the right screen, it's very helpfully laid out a copy of our flight plan route for us. We're currently at A, so the first waypoint we'd head to would be B. You'll see that selected, and as standard, this is on automatic mode. It will move between those waypoints for you as you approach them. But if you do want to manually do that, you can. And you can select forward and backwards between any of those waypoints. You'll see it's given them all a letter. We're currently at Salzburg, at A, and we'll end up at Innsbruck. So those two buttons there, either of those will select you onto manual mode, and then you've got the lever under the right screen which will take you forward or backwards through the waypoints.
Switching to waypoint Delta.
But for today we're going to switch back onto automatic mode and let our backseater do it for us. It's up to you how many waypoints you put into your flight path. You'll see there's a couple of bits where I put some quite close together because there's particularly sharp bends. We're perhaps doing an unrealistic route today. It's maybe not where a tornado would ever really be flying. We're departing from Salzburg, ending up at Innsbruck, but it is a route that's really suited to a plane with the abilities of the tornado, where you can really enjoy the low-level flights. So to use the waypoint system, we need to check our HSI selector is set to nav, which is the first option. It doesn't really matter which mode your HUD is in, but you're going to get this almost a sort of horseshoe, almost a complete circle on your HUD, and that's telling you the heading for your next waypoint. Now in this route, it's quite mountainous. We won't always fly directly at that, but it's going to let us know which way to go. We might have to deviate around some hills. But we'll also look at the HSI, which will give us the course to the next waypoint, and also the distance. So a lot of the time we'll look at the HUD, but the HSI is also a very useful reference point for this type of navigation. You'll notice there isn't a route line actually displayed in that central map screen. I believe that's because an early tornado wouldn't have such an ability. But if it is something you would like to help you navigate, there is an option to turn that on. So pop up the menu, go to number 4, and then number 5, show flight plan on map. And there you can see a visualization of our route. But we're not going to use that today, because actually you can navigate just fine with the HUD and the HSI. So we've taken off from Salzburg, we've made a right turn, we're getting ourselves back onto our correct course.
400 knots.
You'll hear speed and distance to waypoint callouts from our backseater. We're just passing over the fortress in Salzburg, enjoying the splendid views. And you'll see our waypoint marker on the HUD is showing us where to head to, which is this gap in the mountains as we fly into the Salzach Valley.
Switching to waypoint Foxtrot.
I did put a few waypoints in close proximity around this part of the route, just to help get us steered into this valley correctly.
To waypoint.
As we fly down the Saltsack Valley, we are now approaching the Hohenwerfen Castle, which you may have seen in the film Where Eagles Dare, or the TV show The Man in the High Castle. Using a combination of the symbology on the hood and the course line and distance on the HSI display really does give you a good sense of where you need to be heading and when, and it's generally quite easy to follow a route. With a low level route like this, or a route where you want lots of changes of direction, you can see why it's useful to leave the waypoint system on automatic, let the back seater make those changes for you rather than shuffling yourself between those two seats and manually moving the increments forward. Of course, if you were doing a high level flight, perhaps with not so many different waypoints,
500 knots.
It's perfectly possible to have it in manual mode and make that input yourself.
5 miles to waypoint.
We followed the Saltsack to the south of Salzburg. It now takes quite a sharp turn to the west as it heads towards Zell am See.
Switching to waypoint India. Juliet.
We're now making the sharp turn at Zell am See, up over the lake. This area is famous for being a holiday destination for the wealthy, skiing, hiking, and where the final episode of Band of Brothers was filmed.
Miles to waypoint.
Watch the HSI here, and you'll see how it's useful to use in combination with the hood. Obviously with the hood you've only got a certain field of view where the symbol can go in, but the HSI can show you, say, a 90-degree turn. It can show you that full extent of the turn as you approach, so very helpful to keep you on the correct route.
Switching to waypoint November. Five miles to waypoint.
Another sharp turn to the right as we re-enter the Salzach Valley. And you can see why I quite enjoy flying around this area.
Miles to waypoint. 5 miles to waypoint. Five miles to waypoint.
Our next big turn is into the Zilla Valley, entering just by Zell and
400
Zilla,
knots.
and heading north to where the Zilla joins the Inns.
Ten miles to waypoint. Five miles to waypoint.
Our final turn is at the north end of the Zilla Valley, where we turn into the valley of the River
5 miles
Inn,
to waypoint.
where a few miles further along we will find Innsbruck. To the right of us is a small city called Rattenberg, which is actually the smallest city in Austria. We're starting to slow down now and gaining a little bit of height to help us on our descent. Gears going down. And we're trying to use the
You're
waypoints
fast.
that we programmed in to help get us into line with the runway a little further on. The descent takes us over the town, and it's quite a steep approach path at Innsbruck, and there's no ILS to help. We're now on finals, trying not to come in too shallow for what is a steep approach into Innsbruck.
400 feet. $300 feet. 150 feet. 30 feet. Excellent landing, sir.
Well, that's always nice to hear, isn't it? Thanks for joining me in this tutorial today, where we've looked at VOR, TACAN, ILS, and finally Waypoint Navigation. Hopefully it's been of use to you, and please feel free to like, subscribe, and comment.